So, the book of Revelation. When you hear that, what comes to mind? Probably beasts, angels, prophecies about the end of the world, right? But what if I told you that hidden inside all that cryptic imagery is one of the most blistering, ferocious economic attacks in all of ancient history?
Yeah, when we think about Revelation's beef with Rome, we usually jump straight to the persecution of the early Christians. And that's definitely part of it. But what if the real target, the core of the argument, wasn't just about religious freedom? What if it was about something much more, well, down to earth, something tangible, like the very engine that powered the Roman Empire, its economy? So today, we're going to dive deep into an idea from the scholar Richard Bauckham. And his argument is pretty compelling. He says that the author of Revelation, this guy, John of Patmos, was doing something incredible. He was constructing this brilliant, absolutely devastating takedown of the entire Roman economic machine. He saw it as a system that wasn't just unfair, but was fundamentally exploitative and, get this, idolatrous. All right, so how does John build this case? Well, he gives us these two incredibly powerful symbols for Rome. And these aren't just, random monsters he dreamed up. No, they are a super precise illustration of the two faces of Roman power. You've got one side that's beautiful, seductive, and then you've got the other, which is just terrifying and brutal.
And look at the relationship here. It's so clever. You have the harlot, which is all about Rome's economic pull, its cultural glamour, and she's literally riding the beast. I mean, what a powerful visual metaphor, right? It's basically saying that Rome's seductive soft power, all that wealth, that culture, the promise of a good life, it was all propped up, completely supported by its terrifying military muscle. The luxury of the harlot was basically paid for by the violence of the beast.
Calling Rome a harlot wasn't just some random insult John threw out there. It was actually a really precise theological and economic argument. He's doing something brilliant here. He's merging two Old Testament symbols. First, you've got Babylon, the classic symbol of an oppressive political empire that crushed God's people. Then you have Tyre, which was the great trading city of the ancient world. The prophet Isaiah had called Tyre a harlot because all of its relationships with other nations were purely about one thing: profit. So John looks at Rome and sees the monstrous combination of both.
And this metaphor, it goes right down to what she's wearing. The harlot isn't just vaguely rich. Nope, she's specifically decked out in gold, precious stones, and pearls, the very luxury goods that Rome was sucking out of its provinces. So, in a very real, very literal sense, she is wearing the profits of her own economic exploitation. It's written all over her. So, the text talks about this wine that makes all the nations drunk. What's that all about? Well, think of it as the imperial propaganda machine, the famous Pax Romana, the Roman peace. Rome was selling this idea of peace, stability, and a great environment for business. But John is saying, hold on, this is all a delusion. It's like the seductive charm of that prostitute, tricking the nations into buying into a system where, trust me, they're paying a very, very high price for those so-called benefits.
Okay, and this is the crucial link. This is where economics and religion just become completely inseparable in John's critique. See, to get ahead in Rome's economy, to really participate, you implicitly had to play along with its state religion. We're talking about the imperial cult, the whole worship the emperor thing. This cult provided the spiritual, the religious justification for the whole rotten system. Any gratitude you might feel for the Roman peace was supposed to be channeled into worshiping the state itself. It was the perfect way to cloak raw exploitation in a nice, shiny veneer of religious duty.
All right, let's move on, because in chapter 18, this critique gets incredibly specific. It's like John puts Rome on trial, right in front of everyone. And what's his primary evidence? A shockingly detailed list of its imports. I mean, it reads less like some mystical prophecy and a lot more like a forensic financial audit of a deeply corrupt empire.
28. That's the number. John lists 28 specific categories of cargo being shipped into Rome. Now, this isn't just a vague, oh, wealth is bad kind of thing. No way. This is a meticulously crafted indictment. Each item on the list represents the insatiable, globe-spanning appetite of the capital city.
And this is where it gets really genius. John isn't just pulling this list out of thin air. He's actually weaponizing Roman self-criticism against them. A lot of the stuff on his list, it's the exact same stuff that Roman writers, guys like Pliny and Tacitus, were already complaining about. They saw these luxury goods as proof of moral rot and the absurd extravagance of the Roman elite. So John is basically just holding up a mirror to the empire and saying, see, even you know this is wrong.
I mean, just look at the list.
The detail is stunning. He's talking about fine linen from Egypt, purple and scarlet dyes, which were huge status symbols, even silk, all the way from China. He mentioned citrus wood. This was for making tables that could cost more than a whole country estate. And ivory, which was harvested so aggressively that it basically wiped out elephant populations in North Africa. This isn't just a shopping list, it's the official ledger of imperial excess.
And you know what? The text itself tells us how to read this list. It frames these things not just as products, but as objects of a deep psychological craving. It's basically describing an addiction. The language it uses paints this picture of self-indulgent opulence, of that flashy, glittering display of wealth that was just so first-century Rome.
But John saves his most devastating punch for the very end of the list, the final cargo item. He uses the common Greek term for slaves, somata, which literally just means bodies. But then he adds a little phrase, and human souls. Or you could translate it as human persons. And with that one addition, he forces the reader to stop and confront a horrifying reality. The things being traded on this ledger of luxury, they're human beings.
By putting that item last, John delivers his final verdict on the whole Roman economic system. See, his point isn't just the slave trade is bad. Of course it is. His point is much bigger. It's that the entire system of luxury and consumption, a system built on conquest and ripping resources from the provinces, ultimately rests on a foundation of complete and utter contempt for human life.
So, okay, in the vision, this magnificent but totally corrupt city finally falls. The big question is, who mourns its passing? And John is super specific about this. He names 3 distinct groups of mourners, and let me tell you, their grief is incredibly revealing.
Yeah, they're not crying over the loss of art, or culture, or history. Nope. They're weeping because their stock market has just crashed. Their whole source of income has evaporated overnight. John shows us their laments as a way to expose this huge network of collaborators who all had a very personal, vested interest in keeping this whole exploitative system going.
So who are they? Well, first, you've got the kings of the earth. And this doesn't just mean literal kings. It's the local ruling class, the aristocrats in places like Asia Minor, who basically cut a deal with Rome to keep their own power and get a piece of the pie. Second, the merchants. These are the big-time global traders who got fabulously wealthy, shipping all these luxury goods into the capital. And third, the mariners. We're talking the entire shipping industry, from the ship owners right down to the sailors, whose whole livelihood depended on that constant flow of cargo. Put them all together, and you have the political, commercial, and logistical pillars of the entire empire.
You know, this quote here from Aelius Aristides, a provincial orator from back then, it just perfectly captures the mourner's point of view. He looks at Rome and he's just in awe. He sees this marvel of global commerce, the center of the entire world, where every good thing eventually ends up. But that's the thing. What he sees as a magnificent achievement, John of Patmos sees as a complete moral abomination.
And John just drives this point home with such a stark contrast. Down on earth, you've got all the beneficiaries of the empire crying over their lost profits. But up in heaven, there's a party going on. The saints, the prophets, the martyrs, in other words, the victims of this system, they're all celebrating. Because for them, the fall of Rome isn't a financial crisis, it's the ultimate triumph of God's justice. It really all comes down to your perspective, right? Whether you profit from the system or you get crushed by it.
So this all leads to the million-dollar question, doesn't it? What's the takeaway for the people actually listening to this prophecy back in the 1st century? What are they supposed to do? I mean, a lot of them were merchants and traders and regular citizens just trying to make a living inside this very system.
And then comes the command, echoing down from heaven. And honestly, this is the ethical climax of the entire book of Revelation. It is a direct, it is an urgent call to action.
Now remember, John's audience was in Asia Minor. They weren't actually in the city of Rome. So this can't be a literal command to, pack your bags and leave town. It's a call for divestment. It's a demand to stop collaborating, to stop participating, and to stop profiting from an economic structure that he has just shown is built on idolatry and injustice. It basically forces every single person listening to make a choice about their own complicity in the system.
And just like that, this nearly 2,000-year-old book, a text we so often just dismiss as some bizarre, confusing vision of the future, it suddenly becomes this uncomfortably relevant critique of the present. It really pushes us, it forces us to look at the economic and political systems that shape our own world and ask a pretty difficult question. Where, if anywhere, do we see the patterns of Babylon today?